Good morning, it's Morgan. Welcome to Murder in the Morning. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the Ken and Barbie Killers. So I'm gonna try to do a Barbie makeup look. So we'll just see how that goes. But like I said, today's story is going to be what the public has deemed the Ken and Barbie murders, because I guess they resemble what people would think Ken and Barbie would look like. So to start out, Karla Leanne Homolka was born May 4th, 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario, Canada. So this is another Canada case. She was the oldest of 3 daughters. Her other sisters were Lori and Tammy, and they will both be in this story later, as well as her parents. So the family lived in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, and Karla began working part-time at a pet shop while attending Sir Winston Churchill Secondary School. After graduating in 1988, she was hired by a veterinarian clinic to work as a veterinarian assistant, and then later she took a similar job at the Martindale Animal Clinic. Will later be referenced for her crimes again. She met Paul Bernardo, who is the Ken in this story. She met him at a restaurant in Scarborough on October 17th, 1987, and they were both attending a convention in Toronto. She was 17 years old and he was 23. She was over the age of consent in Canada at that time, so there was like nothing legally sketchy about the relationship, but just overall, that's a big age gap, especially because she was only 17. And then he did propose to her December 24th. So quickly after they met, they were engaged. So now let me tell you a little bit about Paul's background. So Paul was born into a wealthy but dysfunctional family. His mother was adopted into a stable family, and his father became an accountant. His father was abusive to his wife and children, and his mother had a boyfriend, but her parents disapproved of him, so she ended up marrying Bernardo, Paul's father, in 1960. And since he was abusive, Paul's mom started seeing an old boyfriend, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Paul Bernardo on August 27th, 1964. But Kenneth Bernardo accepted that she had an affair and decided to be listed as the biological father on the birth certificate. So growing up, Paul didn't know that Kenneth Bernardo wasn't his biological father, because the birth certificate even said that he was the biological father. So this whole time he's thinking that it's his father biologically. So in 1975, Kenneth, the dad, he fondled a girl and was charged with child molestation, and he sexually abused his own daughter. Paul's mom became depressed after all of this abuse and withdrew from family life, and she ended up even living in the basement of their home. And while the older children felt the effects of this abuse and emotional and mental turmoil, Paul seemed unscathed by it. He was described as being always happy, a young boy who smiled a lot. They said he was so cute, had a sweet smile that made mothers just want to pinch his cheeks whenever they saw him. That he was a perfect child that they all wanted, well-mannered, doing well in school, and so sweet in his Boy Scout uniform. After an argument he had with his parents, they told him of his actual parentage, that Kenneth wasn't his father, and in his words, he started calling his mother a slob, and in his words, a whore. When he was 16, quickly, relationship with his parents was basically completely gone, and he no longer had respect for his, now he knows, not biological father, and he didn't have any respect for his mother anymore. He graduated and opted to work for Amway. It was said that he bought the books and tapes of famous motivational, get rich and famous experts. Bernardo and his friends practiced the techniques on women that they met in bars, and they were fairly successful, it said. By the time he attended the University of Toronto in Scarborough, he had developed dark sexual fantasies. He enjoyed humiliating women in public. He would beat up the women that he dated. He just really seemed to take a quick turn for the worst. Compared to what people said about him as a child, this is like a whole new person, basically. When he met Karla, it was very different from the other girls that he knew because she encouraged his sadistic sexual behavior, whereas other girls obviously did not. Trigger warning, there is rape, sexual assaults, and minors involved in this. At the time, there was a Scarborough rapist. As we know, that was Paul, but at the time they didn't know who this was. And so his pattern was the same for all of them, mostly. The victim would get off of a bus and he would grab her from behind and pull her to the ground. And then he would sexually assault her. And after 2 years, the number had grown to 11 victims. And he would have like some months where he wouldn't do anything, and then he would, come back and start doing it again. And it kept growing. So the police, they really had nothing to go on. They had collected plenty of physical evidence. A lot of the women hadn't seen who had done it because he would grab them from behind, or sometimes the women would be called hysterical, and it just was, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence going on this, but the police were able to create a sketch of who the Scarborough rapist was, according to these women's accounts. And even though the police had it, they didn't show it to the public for a very long time. And when they finally did on May 29th, 1990, many of Paul's friends noticed that it looked a lot like Paul. And they would go to their other friends and say, hey, doesn't this guy look like Paul? So one of Paul's best friends ended up contacting the police and said, hey, that looks a lot like my buddy. And then after numerous reports of people saying, this looks like Paul Bernardo, the police took him in for questioning. And then they asked him for a DNA sample, which he provided them. Surprising. But because they had like over 100 suspects, people that they had taken DNA samples for, and because DNA took a lot longer back then, it ended up being a long time until that ever got tested, which is a very bad thing. Because if they had just taken the multiple reports of people saying, hey, this looks just like him, and just tested him first, I guess, then there wouldn't really be anything left to this story. But there is, of course. So now Karla and, I almost called him Ken. Now Karla and Paul are basically inseparable. She had said that she liked a lot of guys beforehand, but once she met Paul, it was over for her. She knew that she wanted to be with him and she really liked him. Her family also adored him. They loved him and thought that he was a really great guy and loved any chance they got to spend time with him. It's amazing how people can be so wrong about someone, and everyone just thought he was super handsome and charismatic. And the interesting thing is that once he moved to St. Catharines and started living with her parents, that the sexual assaults in Scarborough stopped, and no one, caught on to that. As soon as he moves, they stop. I wonder if there's a connection there. Anyways, so he started spending a lot of time with their family, obviously, and he became obsessed with Karla's youngest sister, Tammy, even though he was engaged to Karla. So he started peeping into her windows as she got changed, and Karla knew about this. And she would actually help him by breaking some of Tammy's blinds so that he could have a better view. So on December 23rd, 1990, Karla stole an anesthetic agent from her clinic, which is what it ended up being was an animal tranquilizer. She crushed up some pills and she put it in a rum and eggnog cocktail and went down into the basement with her youngest sister, Tammy. So it's Karla, Paul, and Tammy in the basement, and they're just saying, hey, don't tell mom and dad, we're gonna let you drink. And even though I don't know what the drinking age is in Canada, but here in America it's 21, and Tammy, I mean, even Karla, I don't think was 21. So interesting that they were on board with doing this in the first place. So after Tammy was unconscious, her sister still decided to hold up a halothane soaked towel up to her sister's nose and mouth, just to like really make sure that she was out of it or whatever. So then this all happened, this is 2 days before Christmas, right? This all happened because Karla wanted to give it as a Christmas gift to Paul. Since Karla was no longer a virgin, Paul was not her first, she wanted to give her sister's virginity to her fiance as a Christmas gift. Pretty messed up. So her sister's drugged now, and he starts sexually assaulting her. And after he's done with her, he turns to Karla and says, "Your turn." And Karla participates. And this is all being videotaped as well. Just to make matters worse, they decided to videotape the entire thing, and so that is how we know exactly what happened. And then Tammy starts vomiting, and then she chokes on her vomit. And this is all happening while the parents are upstairs. So the kids are in the basement and they're sexually assaulting their sister, well, her sister, and then she starts vomiting and then choking on her vomit. And they tried to revive her, they couldn't. So they called 911, but they first hid the evidence, dressed Tammy, and moved her into the bedroom in the basement. So they fully covered their tracks before calling 911. And a few hours later, Tammy was pronounced dead in the St. Catherine's General Hospital without having regained consciousness, unfortunately. So when Tammy was in the hospital, they discovered a chemical burn on her face where the halothane cloth had been pressed to her nose and mouth. And I have seen the picture. It is not pleasant. It's not something that you would write off as normal or something that you would say, oh, she threw up and she had an allergic reaction. Like, no, this was big, gross. I don't want to say gross. It was gnarly. It was not a normal looking burn. And they even said that it was a chemical burn. But even after all of that, they ruled it natural causes, as an accidental, that she just drank too much, vomited, and then choked on her vomit, even with that chemical burn. So that was another mistake that I don't know if you could have tested for what gave her the chemical burn, but it was not handled correctly. And maybe again, they could have, just pushed them a little harder on the questioning, and then maybe they would have spilled. I don't know. Tammy, who was 15 years old, died because of Paul and Karla. Simple as that. Even after Tammy died, they recorded, again, videotaped Karla wearing Tammy's clothes and pretending to be her. Probably just so that he could, get some sort of, rush from it or satisfaction. So her parents were absolutely devastated, as you would be if your child at 15, especially, like just out of the blue, 2 days before Christmas, dies. They didn't think that Karla or Paul had any involvement whatsoever, but to give the parents, some grieving room, Karla and Paul moved out. Once they moved in together, Paul wasn't done after the whole Tammy situation. He wanted more. And so he told Karla, hey, how about you get some gal friends to come over and we'll drug them and I'll sexually assault them. So she would meet young girls and basically convince them to come over and hang out, and then she would drug them, and then they would both abuse them. The girls would wake up and they wouldn't know what had just happened. And if they did, either the police wouldn't listen or they didn't go to the police. But also when they moved in together, he started becoming physically abusive. He had verbally abused her, but then he started getting physically abusive. And if she would threaten to leave him, he would threaten to tell the police that they killed Tammy. And he had videotape proof that she was involved. So that kind of made her, she felt trapped and she had to stay with him she felt like she had to stay with him because he was threatening to go to the police. So then on June 19th, 1991, he found a 14-year-old girl named Leslie, and she missed her curfew after returning back from a funeral. And so she was locked out of her house, and he pulls up, offers her a cigarette, and she is going back to his car to get the cigarette when he blindfolded her and forced her into the vehicle and then drove her to his house. Then he informed Karla that they had a playmate. They then recorded themselves again torturing and sexually assaulting her, all while listening to Bob Marley and David Bowie. The next day, according to Paul, Karla gave her a lethal dose of Halcoin, but Karla claimed that Paul strangled her. And then they put her body in the basement, and the next day they had dinner at her parents' house. So once they had left, they decided to dismember Leslie and encase every piece of her in cement. They dropped off those cement blocks into the local lake, Lake Gibson, and a block weighing about 200 pounds ended up staying near the shore when on June 29th, 1991, a father and son were on a fishing expedition and they discovered it. She had an orthodontic appliance and they were able to connect that it was Leslie. The same day that these cement blocks were found, they got married. So Paul and Karla got married on the same day that the cement blocks were found. Pretty crazy. So then on April 16th, 1992, Paul and Karla were driving through St. Catharines looking for potential victims when they spotted Kristen French. She was a 15-year-old student. She was walking home and they pulled over and they pulled out a map, and Karla asked her like, hey, do you know how, like, we need directions? And since they had a map, she thought it was, legit or whatever. So they pulled into a church parking lot near Kristen walking by, and Karla got out and showed her the map and said, hey, we need directions. And that's when Paul attacked her from behind and forced her into the front seat of the car, and then Karla got in and controlled the girl by pulling her by the hair. So since Kristen took the same route home every single day, her family was quickly able to realize that she wasn't home already, even though she should have been, and they quickly called authorities and people were looking for her. And luckily there were a lot of eyewitnesses and they had seen her talking to a couple, and they noted the car as well. So a billboard came up and it said, have you seen this car, with the phone number of where to call if you've seen the car. The only problem was the car that everyone said that they had seen, they said they saw a beige Camaro when in actuality it was a gold Nissan. So everyone was looking for the wrong car, essentially. So that didn't end up helping, unfortunately. But even one of Kristen's shoes got left behind, so they grabbed her very quickly and it caused one of her shoes to fall off. So again, they filmed themselves torturing her and sexually abusing her, and they forced her to drink a lot of alcohol. And the next day, they kept her for a couple days. They killed her right before attending a family dinner for Easter. Again, Karla said that he is the one who strangled her, and then Paul says that Karla noticed that Kristen was trying to escape, and so she started beating her with a rubber mallet and then strangled her, and then immediately after went to go fix her hair. That's Paul's account. So Kristen's body was found naked in a ditch April 30th, 1992. She had been washed and her hair had been cut off. Investigators thought her hair was kept as a trophy, but Karla said that it was to help her be unrecognized. So then a task force was put together to investigate these two murders of Leslie and of Kristen, but they hadn't connected that the Scarborough rapist could be also the same person doing these murders. So finally, in December 1992, they decide to begin testing the DNA samples from Bernardo taken 3 years prior. So then on December 27th, 1992, Bernardo severely beat Karla with a flashlight on her face, head, and limbs. And it was so bad that he claimed that she had been in a car accident. And then she returned to work January 4th, 1993. But her coworkers were very skeptical about, what was going on, that she had been in a car accident and hadn't been abused. So they called her parents, and her parents went and picked her up, and they said that she was frantically looking through the house looking for something. They took her to the hospital and her injuries were documented. She gave a statement to the police saying that she was a battered spouse and filed charges against Paul. He was arrested but then later released, and Karla moved in with relatives. Toronto police were informed that Paul's DNA matched the Scarborough's rapist's DNA, and they placed him under 24-hour surveillance watch. So instead of just arresting him immediately, they wanted to talk to Karla and see if she could provide any information on him, and she thought that she was being called in about the abuse. So that's what she talked about, and when she got home, she spilled everything to her family and said how she and Paul had killed Leslie and Kristen, and that it was recorded on videotape. The police then reopened the investigation on Tammy as well. So then her parents advised her to get a lawyer, and so she gets a lawyer named George Walker, and she wants to know if she can get full immunity if she cooperates with the police. George Walker, her attorney, goes to the director of the Crown Criminal Law Office, and he says, hey, there's videotapes of the assaults, and Karla does have involvement in the crimes, but the director says, hey, because of Karla's involvement, we can't get her immunity. That's not a possibility. So then Paul gets arrested on February 17th, 1993, but his link to the murders was weak, so there was a contingency on the warrant. They couldn't, anything that they found videotape wise, they had to watch it in the home, and there was a timeline. They could only search the house for a certain amount of days. So after 71 days, they hadn't found the videotapes that she was referencing that showed the rapes and the, everything. So on May 5th, 1993, Walker, her attorney, was told that they could give Karla a 12-year sentence plea bargain, and she had 1 week to accept it, but she had to cooperate with the police, of course. And if she declined, she'd be charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder and other crimes. The attorney accepted, and then Karla accepted. So on May 14th, 1993, the plea was finalized, and she began giving statements to the investigators. Karla, on May 18th, 1993, was arraigned on 2 counts of manslaughter, and Paul was charged with 2 counts each of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, aggravated sexual assault, and first-degree murder, as well as 1 of dismemberment, and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. So after everything's done with Karla, right? She's getting 12 years, that's it, right? The videotapes are found. So just in time for Paul's trial. September 12th, 1994, Paul's trial, the videotapes are found. The public realizes that Karla was a willing accomplice. And while the tapes weren't allowed to be shown, the audio was. And it's very clear from the video and audio that she enjoyed it and that she was just as much a part of this and was not being forced. She was not being threatened to participate in the torture and in the rapes and all of that stuff. It doesn't show the murders on the tapes. So the defense really tried to say, well, we don't know that he killed them. Karla could have killed them, and that's what Paul said. Paul said Karla is the one who actually killed them. And since it's not shown on tape, they don't have any evidence pointing either way, of course. So the public was outraged that Karla got off so easily, because now they know that she was just as much a part of this as Paul was. But since she had cooperated with them, they didn't see any reason to take away the plea. They couldn't break the agreement and reopen the case. So December 2001, the Canadian authorities determined that the videotapes were of no use anymore, and so all of the videotapes were destroyed. So then she testified in Paul's trial, and then afterwards after testifying, she was returned to the Kingston prison for women. If you remember, that is where Evelyn Dick also went to the Kingston Penitentiary. So that's just crazy that 2 stories back to back, they went to the same place. I don't know if they're exactly the same, but they're both Kingston and they're both prisons. So anyways, Karla's mother was going through it and she ended up being hospitalized because of mental breakdowns, because she would like collapse from the breakdown. So then Karla moved from Kingston to the Joliet Institution in 1997, and she wrote an apology to her family and basically just blames Paul for everything. She says, "This is the hardest letter I've had to write. I know you're probably gonna hate me once you read it, but I can't lie to you anymore. Both Paul and I are responsible for Tammy's death. Paul was in love with her and he wanted me to get her sleeping pills so that he could drug her, and he threatened me physically and emotionally. You have no idea what he put me through. It was so stupid for me to listen to him, to agree to it. Maybe it was the combination of the food and the drugs that made her vomit. I tried so hard to bring her back. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. I'll never forgive myself. Karla, XOXO." So like, no, it doesn't matter if it's the combination of food and drugs. It's because of the drugs. Like, she wouldn't have thrown up and choked to death if you hadn't done that to her. So just like bringing that part in is just unnecessary and just shows that she doesn't take responsibility for her actions. Even though she may say, yeah, I had a part to play, she won't ever take responsibility that if she just hadn't done this, it never would have happened. So then when they were trying to do a release hearing, they said that she wasn't a threat to society. I think the families of the victims would say otherwise. 2-day hearing was held in June 2005, and he ruled that upon her release, July 4th, 2005, the judge thought that she would still pose a threat to the public. And so he put certain restrictions upon her release, like she can't move without telling them. If she's gonna be gone for more than 48 hours, they need a 72-hour heads up. She can't change her name. She can't contact Paul or the families of the victims or any known violent criminals. She couldn't hang out with people under the age of 16. She couldn't consume drugs other than prescription. She had to do therapy, counseling, and she had to provide a DNA sample. And if she broke any of these rules, then there would be a 2-year maximum prison term. So she was released from prison July 4th, 2005, after only 11 years in prison. And she relocated to Montreal. And then November 30th, 2005, so only a couple months later, a judge lifted all restrictions on her release. So all the things that I just said, gone, because he said there wasn't enough evidence to justify them. You had literal videotapes to prove that she was a danger to people. Anyway, so then she tried to have her name changed in 2006, but it was rejected. And then she relocated to Guadalupe, changed her name later, and then she married her lawyer's brother, and she has 2 sons and 1 daughter. I'd be interested that the lawyer would let their brother date her. I don't know who would do that. But April 19th, 2010, she was eligible for pardon for her crimes. And then as of 2020, she is living alone, not with a husband, not with children. And she was at one point a volunteer at a primary school. And then people found out who she was and what she did. And obviously people were outraged. So now let's get into Paul's trial. His trial was delayed for 2 years after his arrest. One of these reasons is because he had given the videotapes to his lawyer and in hopes that it would never get into the hands of the prosecutors. And then it was just all this stuff about who should have the tapes. It comes out, obviously. And when Karla testified against him, she said that his sadistic sexual fantasies were slowly getting worse and that he would make her wear a dog collar and just call her cruel names, and just all around he would just slowly get more sadistic with his sexual fantasies. I don't know if I'd say the word slowly. I think it went pretty fast. But defense tried to attack her credibility and say that she was not a victim in any of this and that she was just as much of a willing participant. But that didn't really matter, because whether she's lying or not, there's videotape proof that he did this stuff. So on September 1st, 1995, he was convicted of all charges against him regarding kidnappings, rapes, murders of Leslie and Kristen. He faced trials in the death of Tammy and of the Scarborough rapes. So while he was found guilty and sentenced to life, in Canada, he was able to apply for parole after only 25 years in prison. But because of, how intense his crimes were, he's probably never gonna get let out. But it's just scary to think that he can even apply for it. And then while in prison, he confessed to 14 more sexual assaults in the Scarborough area. So that is the insane story of the Ken and Barbie Killers as they have been deemed by the public. Here is the finished makeup look. Let me know what you think. I think that Karla got, oh my goodness, she got off so easy. I know it's because they didn't have the videotapes yet, and so she played the whole, oh, I'm an abused wife, I have nothing to do with this, I was forced. But oh, if only they could have reopened the case and given her life in prison is what I mean. Because her getting to leave after 12 years and have a family, change her name, get married, have kids, all of this. And like the fact that she was a volunteer at a primary school. So she's able to keep the lie going that she's a normal person for at least some amount of time. And that's not okay, because she killed her own sister. She killed 3 people and lured young girls into getting sexually assaulted and drugged and all of this stuff, and she got off in just 12 years. At least Paul got life, but they both should have gotten life in prison for sure. So tell me what you think about that, and if you think that Karla got off too easy, and let me know what I should talk about next week. Bye!